Hello and welcome to From Angels to Zen. We have reached the letter G in our spiritual alphabet, and this week G is for ghosts. To talk us through the world of ghostly phenomena, I'm delighted to introduce our special guest. Callum A. Cooper is currently based at the University of Northampton as a PhD researcher and lecturer of psychology. He's a member of the Society for Psychical Research, an academic member of the Academy for Spiritual and Consciousness Studies, and a student member of the Parapsychological Association. His fields of interest include parapsychology, the psychology of death, human beliefs, psychological research methods, and Egyptology. His book, entitled Telephone Calls from the Dead, is a must-read for anyone who is interested in the serious study of unexplained phenomena relating to life after death. It's a great book. Love it. So hi Callum, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for coming on to do the show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on.
So just to get us started, Callum, could you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do and the role of a parapsychologist?
Okay, well, I'm qualified first and foremost as a psychologist, but my specialist area is parapsychology. So when I did my first degree in psychology, my dissertation heavily involved parapsychological phenomena and research. So I focused on the sense of being stared at. So this idea that when we're in a public setting, can we actually pick up through our bodily sensations or through the mind this sense that someone behind us might be staring at the back of our heads? And so I went out and looked at this as a field study rather than an actual lab study, which has been done mostly in that way. So that is what took me from psychology specifically into the area of parapsychology. So what's parapsychology? Well, parapsychology is the study of strange human experiences that current science doesn't seem to be able to explain. And these are split into three different categories. These can be ESP, which covers a variety of three different types of psychic phenomena, which are telepathy, mind-to-mind interaction, clairvoyance, the ability to see information at distance, such as something that's on the other side of a sealed or locked door, and precognition, being able to come out with information about a future event. Then we have psychokinesis, PK, also known as telekinesis, the ability to affect people or the environment via the power of the mind alone. So can you actually change someone's heart rate just by focusing on them and thinking about it? Or can you actually affect metal objects and bend them at distance without actually touching them? And then the third area is survival. And this is what psychical research really started off with, and then it later developed in the 1930s into parapsychology. But the main interest of parapsychology, its roots has been survival. This whole idea of mediumship, hauntings, life after death, and so forth, all these issues that suggest that the mind might be able to exist beyond the body or even beyond bodily death, so survival issues, and incorporates so much. So we had the mediumship, the hauntings, poltergeist, the telephone calls from the dead, apparitions and ghosts, and reincarnation, and then we get the mind out of body experiences, and near-death experiences.
Thank you very much. That is a lot. And us here at Angels to Zen are very interested in all of those topics. And in particular, viewers, if you look back at the letter E, E is for evidence. And there we talk a little bit about lab research versus field research, especially in the realms of parapsychology. So you might be interested in that. And when Callum was talking about being interested in the sense of being stared at, some of you will also know that Rupert Sheldrake is a hero of mine. So go to B is for books to see a little bit about Rupert Sheldrake there. Thank you very much. So here's a bit of a tougher question for you. And this came from one of our readers, so
I'm ready for it.
it's important.
Okay.
So, what role does skepticism play in your research and investigations into phenomena such as ghost sightings?
I think it's very important in to have skepticism, not just in parapsychology, but in any science that's trying to tackle something new that we don't quite understand, but we have the inklings of something going on. So we need to start from point one and investigate it and follow it up. So we're going to have to start with the very roots of how to actually structure a scientific method. So that's always observation and documentation. What are we dealing with? How does it act? And then apply a method. So there's a big difference between skepticism and cynicism.
Which was going to be my next question.
All right. Well, I'll try and keep cynicism to one side then for the moment. But skepticism is very important. Keep an open mind, but don't deny beforehand that something is going on. Clearly, someone has come to you with an account that something's going on, something's happening, and you need to follow that up. There may be psychological issues involved. You need to look at previous experiences as well. Were there multiple witnesses involved? If we specifically say, if we look at a ghost case, for example, was this in a well-known haunted location? Was it in someone's own house? Were there multiple witnesses? Was this person going to sleep at the time? Were they just waking up? Had they just gone through a tragic family experience, a loss of someone? Had they just had big relationship troubles or something like that? A major change, something that could actually explain some sort of misinterpretation which might have led to something believed to be paranormal. So there, I'm not being cynical in that sense. I'm being very skeptical. I'm looking at the rational explanations before saying, okay, they say they've experienced a ghost. Loads of people have. It must be a ghost. That's not very scientific. That's being overly open and not presenting any scientific method or rationale. That's just pure acceptance. So any scientist is going to follow it up with what we do know before considering what we don't know.
Absolutely.
So that's skepticism.
It's better to work within the known laws of physics first before pushing the envelope, you know, answer what might be the obvious causes or causes that could be more rationally explained, like you said, before reaching for the conclusion straight away that it's a ghost. So absolutely, I agree with that. I'm sure everyone would agree with that. So here's my next question, which you preempted. Maybe you're a bit psychic yourself. What do you think?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I've got anything psychic around here that I could work with. I've got a juggling ball. That's not really psychic, though. I could pretend it.
Could be a stimulus for your intuition. You never
Just
know.
Just got one there. It's not very scientific.
Okay. And, well, I'll tell you, the other day I saw someone doing intuitive readings using peanut M&Ms.
Intuitive? Oh, so quite a bit different from tea leaf readings then. We're using M&Ms in this case.
Yeah, a little bit different, but you know,
How do they do that? They just pour the pack on the table or all over the floor and just make sense of the shape?
Well, they allocated a meaning to each colour, and then they smashed up some of the M&Ms still in the bag, which to my mind is a horrendous waste. And then they mixed them up and they poured some of them out, and whatever colours and shapes were formed, they did sort of an intuitive reading from them. I thought it was quite ingenious, actually. Anything can be a focus for your intuition, I suppose, so why not a juggling ball? Why not?
Well, no, I mean, I'm always quite surprised with rumpologists as well, who believe they can read anything about you or your future from looking at your bum.
And I've heard even stranger ones than that, which, you know, there's mixed age groups that read this blog, so we'll just leave that for now. Okay, so here we are. Next question. Some people seem to be a bit confused between the term skeptic and cynic, which is just what you were about to come on to. And in my own opinion, this has caused unwarranted tension between realms such as parapsychology and us, which is on the other end of the spectrum of spirituality. So what would you say are the differences between a skeptical and a cynical approach to understanding ghosts and ghostly phenomena?
I think you've got to look at skepticism as something in the middle, and then you've got cynicism here and paranormal belief over here. And open-mindedness is still a skepticism.
Sure.
When someone says, well, I'm not really skeptic, but I am open-minded, it's the same thing. It's doubting, but wanting reasonable evidence to actually take on the acceptance and realize there's something new, but actually discover that through scientific means and methods and having suitable evidence laid on the table, not just repeated accounts of someone seeing a ghost in a certain location. That's not enough to convince science, really. It needs different measures from physics of the environment. There's something going on that is outside the rational, that's linking in with people's psychology, that's also creating this effect. And there still seems to be some sort of process going on here that we don't recognize, and this is what we're terming paranormal. So that's what the skeptic's doing. What's the cynic doing? When we say cynic, we mean someone that, even though they might be involved in the paranormal, there are some cynics involved in the paranormal, but they're the people that are constantly debunking. It doesn't matter if the evidence is presented, they will still either just dismiss it outright, not want to look at the evidence, or come up with alternative explanations, even though alternative explanations have been sought in that case. And we're not just talking people's accounts of seeing ghosts, we are talking research papers here that already lay down the rules, what happened, the methodology, the issues that were taken to rule out any experimenter bias, so the experimenter having an effect on the participant, demand characteristics, so the participant trying to figure out what the experimenter's after, or any other artifacts that could actually lead to this false outcome of supposed psychic abilities. So, you might have some papers that have done all that and it's still finding some evidence that suggests this psychic phenomena. The statistics are saying it, or the other research papers saying it, and the cynic will still say, no, it's just not possible. There's an error here. The researcher has got something wrong. They've got the numbers wrong, or there's something going on that's allowing this to slip and create a psychic effect. You famously got different organizations set up. There's the James Randi Education Foundation, I think it was called. Randi is certainly someone you could class as a cynic. He's very interested in the paranormal. His background's in magic. He was the amazing Randi. And, he has never been convinced by anything that parapsychology has produced. Though in the true sense of a cynic, they don't seem to want to read what evidence is available because their mind is already made up. And this is how a belief system can take over your judgment too much. Much like with the error that we get with the paranormal believer, they don't care of the alternatives because they're already set in stone in their own mind that something is going on. But the cynic has already decided nothing is going on. But the skeptic in the middle says, well, I've read the for and I've read the against, and I'm doing my own study here, and I'm not bothered at the outcome either way. I'm just putting barriers in place to make sure there is no error. And they might get an outcome, they might not. But they're the person that's being level-headed in the middle and just assessing the situation and hearing both sides of these arguments and trying to keep control. So the skeptic is in the middle, the cynic is at one extreme end, just like the paranormal believer is.
Okay, thank you. And can I just take that point a little bit further and ask you this?
By all means.
Do you believe that a person's beliefs about what the outcome is going to be can not just affect the way that they look at the results of paranormal investigation, but can in fact affect the outcome of paranormal investigation itself? i.e., as a believer, more likely statistically to experience phenomena than a non-believer?
Well, just so I don't name drop, because it has been mentioned before, and I think both those individuals are perfectly aware that people use them as an example quite often. We have Rupert Sheldrake and we have Chris French. Chris French is involved in anomalistic psychology, which I do find a sort of cynical end of parapsychology. It's still parapsychology, but it is surrounded by a lot of insistence that psychology can already explain what's going on. The near-death experience has nothing to do with entering an altered state of consciousness into death. It is to do with, oxygen deprivation and so forth, causing these images that appear to be something that we assume with being this transition into death. There are all sorts of explanations. It's nothing to do with psychic phenomena whatsoever, whereas Rupert is getting incredible results when he does the sense of being stared at, when he's looked at dogs that know when their owners are coming home, but more so with the sense of being stared at and the telephone telepathy. When you look at the statistics in those studies, they're very high, they're extremely significant, and then when Chris has replicated them, he's found nothing. And he's found statistics that suggest otherwise. Rupert's confident because he's found stuff going on, and therefore is his confidence actually rubbing off on the participants and they're feeling positive, and that's either influencing the effect of something that looks like psi, or it is creating psi. And vice versa with Chris. Chris isn't necessarily being negative, but there's more so that doubt there. It could be subtle, it could be unconscious, but certainly his students will be aware that that's his approach, and they might be his participants as well. And so the opposite's going on there. They're not really sort of looking ahead to actually getting the right telephone call and guessing who it is, or making sure that, I hope this person's actually staring at me this time. Yeah, they're staring this time. You're getting the opposite effect. So that's what's going on there. I really do think that the experimenter's own belief system can actually affect the outcome of a study. Again, that's not just limited to the paranormal, though. It's limited to all kinds of sciences. Just let's take child psychology for an example. You expect child A is going to do something in situation B. If you're already quite passionate that's going to happen, the chances are it might very well happen, especially if you're actually in contact with that child during the study.
Yeah.
You've really got to separate yourself from the participant to make sure that there's no way that you're actually having any influence on them, either by words or body language.
Sure.
It's
Well,
a very good point.
what I think is very interesting is looking at it from a quantum mechanics point of view, experiments that show that our observation of protons and electrons can affect their behavior, our observation of particles affects their behavior. Is it really such a far stretch to think that what we think is going to happen might somehow have an impact on what does happen? To me, it doesn't seem like a very far stretch to get there. And here's my prediction, my psychic prediction. I know, drum roll please. I predict that within the next 2 to 3 years, there is going to be some statistically significant information, some experimentation that does indeed suggest that our thoughts can affect the outcome of things. I've thought it for a while, I've felt it for a while, I've written about it in this blog. Those of you who visit often will know that. And I think that it's just round the corner, and I see it coming from the direction of quantum. That's what I think.
Well, there were some studies that were related to that. We had the spider studies. I know Louis Savard was involved with those, and he's no longer part of parapsychology. He certainly fell into the cynical camp, just believed everything was pointless after that. But he did do some studies that previously had got some interesting results, and they were very mixed with Louis taking them over. So it just goes back to my point with the Chris and Rupert Sheldrake debate. But the idea was that if you take some people that have a phobia, so let's take spiders, for example, you put them in a room, they're watching a slideshow of some very neutral objects, a lamp, some kittens, a mountain, some trees, a deck chair, a spider. And they're hooked up to biopack equipment. So this is measuring skin conductivity. So you can see spikes on a graph every time something's arousing, happy or sad. And when it came to the spider stuff, and you're looking at it, it's virtually a lie detector. Before the spider actually came up in the sequence of pictures, and they had no idea a spider was going to be included, there would be a spike in their arousal before the spider came up, as though unconsciously the body has recognized this potential threat and danger before it's actually happened. So
I actually saw something about that exact experiment on a TV show called Through the Wormhole, which is narrated by Morgan Freeman. It is awesome. It's my Saturday night viewing. I love it. And I believe that experiment was on that as well. So yeah, again, that's very interesting. And that raises the question, is it the mind that is predicting that, or is it the mind that's causing that to be the next thing that appears? Again, it's quite a grey area as to which it might be, I think, still there, but definitely I think there's going to be more research into that area. Okay, let's get back to ghosts, the juicy stuff. That's what we're here for.
okay.
I have another question. So after reading your book, Telephone Calls from the Dead, it seems as if you have had experiences, researched experiences, and witnessed some really extraordinary things that really do challenge rational explanation, and that seem really to transcend the laws of physics that we know. So has there ever been a time, Callum, where you've encountered a psychic or ghostly phenomenal occurrence and thought, okay, I can't explain this, I don't know what's going on here, there's no rational explanation, and if so, can you tell us a little bit about it and what made that particular thing so hard to explain?
Well, to briefly scan over the accounts in the book, there's about 50 different cases that I analysed in total.
Sure.
Now, even though some of those could present a possible rational explanation, because they'd already been and gone, they were events that had been and gone, and I had to follow them up with eyewitness testimony and accounts, there was still, there's room for doubt, but there's no way of casting that doubt, nor is there any room for actually saying it's definitively paranormal. But three of them, about three cases, I thought that I just can't fathom how this would have occurred if what these people are saying is true, if what the telephone company is saying is true, and the dates are correct for when this person died. It just seems, well, were they genuinely having a phone call from the dead? It's just absolutely weird. What I've personally experienced, well, my background is in hauntings. That's how I started off, hauntings and apparitions and ghosts. Growing up in Nottingham, we have a vast amount of history here for ghosts and hauntings. I spent a lot of time investigating places such as Clifton Hall in the centre of Nottingham, Paisley Vale Mills, which is just 5 minutes around the corner from here, sort of in the Mansfield area, near to Chesterfield as well. Paisley Vale Mills presented some unusual things. I was there with some police officers that were quite interested in investigating the paranormal. And in one of the old rooms that was used for housing all the looms, that at one time they'd all be going together making sheets of fabric, very loud and noisy room, place where a lot of people would have got injured. Children were hired to pick stray cotton out from the machines. Typically they'd lose fingers or hands doing that.
Oh,
there were a lot of deaths that went on in the mills as well in the 1800s, and people would just get buried in the local forest surrounding the mills. And we were in there. The place is completely empty, and it's the 4th floor, all a wooden floorboard except for the centre of the room, which has given way, and it's been covered by metal industrial sheets to make sure that the floor stays steady. There's a load of rubble on the floor and loads of pillars ceiling to floor and a massive window, loads of massive windows in fact, but you can see everything in the room because of the security spotlight shining through.
Yeah.
It's only about 3 foot of brickwork below. We stood at one end of the room with various cameras and just started throwing rocks off into the dark, one by one, so they wouldn't clash or get confused. And the last one that I threw, I said, if there are any children here that want to play, throw the rock back. I threw the rock, you hear it tap along the wood and then ting along the metal, slowly tap along the wood the other side and then come to a standstill. And I just said, right, if you don't want to play, fine, but, now's your chance to throw it back. Then you hear this bang, tap, 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 ting, 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 tap, 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 and another rock rolls some 50 foot all the way back towards us. It hasn't dropped from the floor. It's come out of the darkness and followed the same path as the rocks that have been going out. And then I remember the camera just sort of panning and following it out of the dark to us. And it's like a lot of poltergeist type activity. You never see the starting position, but you always see it in mid-flight or where it actually lands. We can clarify there was no one wherever the starting position was. It was straight ahead of us.
Yeah.
But where it started from exactly, was this rock off the floor and it raised off the floor? Was it from a window ledge? We don't know. You just never see it, and you never capture it on camera either. But that's one of those situations where you think, ooh, what's going on there? And in Clifton Hall, I did a sort of similar experiment where it was messing about with objects again. Yeah. And that was drawing round objects. And one of those, an old penny that I'd drawn round had moved outside of the circle. Yet the old whistle that I put next to it, that hadn't moved at all. But when we got back, you're like, no one's been in here. I was the last one to leave. I'm the first one to come back. And we filmed this and we've taken pictures of it. How's it managed to do that? It was only a centimetre, but even still for me, I thought that... to me, that was still significant. I thought, wow, what could have caused that? There's no spider strong enough to do that. And I don't think there was any mice about. And if there were, if it had gone on the piece of paper, surely it would have nudged the whistle that was right next to it.
Sure. And I don't think the mice have got deliberate intent to mess with you either, do they? Can I ask, have you ever seen, because I don't watch a lot of these paranormal shows because I think that they are quite dubious.
Liar.
Obviously, with the magic of television, you can never be truly sure what you're looking at. But there is one show that I absolutely love called Ghost Adventures.
Okay.
Have you come across Ghost Adventures before?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Well, Ghost Adventures is a paranormal show. It is fantastic. And basically, it's these 3 guys, kind of our age, and they go all to different locations and they just seem to evoke the most unbelievable phenomena. Okay. And you just said there, Callum, that you never see the object's starting position. Well, twice the crew that work for the Ghost Adventures have captured on film a rock, just exactly like you said, actually levitate and in front of the camera and fly towards one of the crew members and hit him. And the whole trajectory, the bounce, everything of the rock is there on film. And it's, I think the episode is at the Goldfield Hotel in Las Vegas. So I highly recommend you check it out. I would love to know your expert opinion on that footage. And I shall certainly let the viewers of Angels to Zen know what you say about it. Okay.
Problem with it being mainstream TV, though, is you just don't know if people were in on it and editing it. Though what you bring up with rock throwing, it's such a typical thing with hauntings and more so poltergeists. And you never see any of these extravagant things that are portrayed in films about hauntings with beds spinning in the middle of the room. It's always these subtle bangs and taps and rock throwing. There was 2 of Scott Rogo's books on the track of the poltergeist and also the poltergeist experience. He's got 2 chapters in there that specifically talk about rock throwing poltergeists.
Yeah.
And then if you read This House is Haunted by Guy Loane Playfair about the Enfield poltergeist, that had Lego bricks and marble supposedly being thrown about the place. If you had something like a thermal image camera, you've got more chance of tracking its starting position and where it finished. And also, if the object's actually gathered heat, a lot of the time when people claim it's been thrown by a poltergeist, they pick it up and say, you know, this is incredibly hot.
Yeah.
That's what happened with the marbles in the Enfield poltergeist case.
Sure. Again, it could be, I suppose, the size and shape of those objects, whatever energy is afforded, if it is a spirit being doing it, whatever energy they have to use, perhaps that's the sort of size and shape that they're just able to create some sort of impact on, because it does seem to be similar sized and shaped objects for the most part. Okay,
Possibly.
I have another question. Here's another
Okay.
question, okay? This is a
Yep,
juicy
yep.
one.
Okay.
So many of us who now work in the fields of either parapsychology, like yourself, or spirituality, like me, do
Hmm.
so because we had our curiosity piqued by personal experience of psychic or mediumistic or even ghostly phenomena from an early age. Was that the case with you? Did something happen when you were little that put the thought into your head that there's something going on out there?
Um, Again, that was just because I grew up in Nottingham. We've got a lot of history of hauntings around here. Oh, there we go. I grew up with books from the library that were locally written. This one used to interest me a lot. It's a little pamphlet by a woman called Jane Peters, and she wrote about ghosts around Sutton. I'm in Sutton in Ashfield right now. And these were just all accounts of the local hauntings. And you think, wow, this is incredible. Is this really genuinely going on? Are people actually experiencing this? And that's what sparked my interest. But it never led me to find parapsychology as a subject, or even think that you could actually study the paranormal seriously or somehow turn it into a career. So after I had that initial interest and read all sorts about the Loch Ness Monster, Harry Price's investigations of Borley Rectory, Bigfoot and stuff like that, I went on to college, and it seemed for a while my whole career was going to be based around acting and doing stuff like that, stage performances, maybe being in films and TV, stuff that I still love. But I just saw so many people around me at A level, because you had subjects like media, film studies, theatre, drama, all separate A levels, but they were all being taken by people that wanted to be actors.
Yeah.
And in the college that I was at, you know, you've got some 1,000 students doing that. And I thought, you know, that's every year. What's the chance of me actually kind of making a career out of acting? So I stupidly think I can make a career out of parapsychology, which is an even worse decision. So
Well, you're
for
doing
the routes,
it.
well, I am. It's a kind of a lucky break and just working hard, but it was my route through psychology. I did terrible at A level. I didn't do well at all in my exams, so I'm surprised I even got a university post in it. But I settled with the University of Northampton. They were interested with my passion to study the subject, and it was because of that I chose that university out of the other ones. I did consider other ones that did parapsychology, but they had a big research unit for it. I felt very welcome at home, so that was the place that I went to. But I went there with background in electronics, photography, psychology, sign language, and filmmaking and acting. So it's a very mixed career. And so now I've made my life as a psychologist so far, lecturing on it, produced the books, written papers, and stuff like that. So you know, some people might say it's a lucky break, others might say it's working hard, but it's that's my childhood and why I got into the paranormal.
Lovely, and we should be very proud because at the moment I believe the UK are world leaders in the study of parapsychology. I've been reading recently that we give it the most money, we give it the most attention, even outstripping the US of A, who up until I
Yeah,
believe the 1980s were the world leaders, and they've sort of got a bit fed up with it, but we're still flying the flag, we're still the believers here in the
it's
UK.
the
We're
majority of
still
my
seeking proof.
the majority of my funding for my research has come from the USA. Even though they don't have many places studying it now, they still have scientific establishments
Sure.
and research scholarships that still support parapsychological studies. There are some that aren't active now, but you know, I got scholarships from them at the time, but they still helped me to get to where I am and many other people before me. So I'm very grateful for that. Right now in the US, even though it started out with Duke University and then a whole list of places that you could go to, including John F. Kennedy University, where you could actually do an MS, they call it an MS, we call it an MSc, but a Masters of Science in Parapsychology during the 1980s. And that's produced many well-noted parapsychologists such as Dr.
Sure.
Carlos Alvarado, Lloyd Auerbach, and it was taught by John Palmer and D. Scott Rogan. But right now they only have Atlantic University, where you can do an MA in transpersonal psychology and study parapsychology within that. Or you can go to the University of West Georgia. We have Dr. Christine Simmons Moore from the University of Northampton. She graduated there with her PhD. She's now teaching there after William Roll. And she's got loads of graduate students coming out with an interest in parapsychology, wanted to take this further to PhD. And an excellent thing, her graduate students have just set up a new journal, an online one, called the Journal of Exceptional Experiences in Psychology. So it's starting to make a comeback in the USA, ever so slightly, but the UK is still winning. So.
Yeah, winning. So okay, it's my thought that the only testimony that anybody can ever really believe about ghosts or about paranormal or parapsychological experience is one's own. So that being said, has there been any report of a ghostly sighting that you found particularly convincing? And the million-dollar question, I'm just going to ask it, have you ever seen a ghost?
I'll answer the latter one first. No, I have never seen a ghost. But I have been in situations where people with me have said they've seen a ghost, and I've seen what could have caused the misinterpretation, some fleeting shadows and so forth, or people's own shadows being reflected. Most compelling case of a ghost that I've come across. I can't think of one to mind. The ones that fascinated me the most were, I think there was one mentioned, I think it was by Tyrrell in his book Apparitions. It was first a guest lecture for the SPR, the Society for Psychical Research, in the 1940s. Then he had his book in the 1950s, Apparitions. And I'm sure there's a case in there of an apparition having more of a physical presence than you'd expect. And it was about two sisters that were staying the night in some castle where you could actually stay there. And in the middle of the night, both sisters awoke to see this knight in armor stood at the end of the bed. One of the sisters was so scared she just sat there staring at it. The other one had a lot more confidence and actually got out of bed or went to the end of the bed, reached out and grabbed the knight by the arm. And she actually grabbed hold of what they believed to be this ghost, and she's got a physical hold of it. It pulls back with incredible force and she can't hold on to it anymore, and it vanishes through the door. They don't hear the sound of the door opening or closing, it just stays shut, but he dissolves through the door. And she described the feeling as extremely cold, but rock solid, as though it, it was genuine metal armor. And but she just, no matter how hard she gripped, there was no way she could have done. It just dissolved out of her hand almost, or it got too much strength. But that one, I thought, wow, she's actually managed to touch it. There was experiments that were mentioned by Andrew Mackenzie about this widowed apparition that wandered about the house weeping and stood by the window. And the family wanted to actually test how physical it was. So they put thin thread over the stairway where it would walk up to see if it would break the thread. Sure. And it didn't, it would glide straight past. But if the apparition walked past them, they would feel the kind of wind or the flutter from the dress as it went by. So it's still having this semi-physical presence. People are still feeling it, but it's not making an actual influence on the environment. You put a table there and that apparition actually noticed it and would walk round it rather than through it. So ones where apparitions either have some sort of physical presence or they have a conscious awareness of the environment and things around them, those I find very compelling compared to the ones where they've gone through walls and people have stood in the way and you can't stop it, it doesn't recognize you. It seems to be a recording of the environment. They're interesting, but the ones where you've got this interaction element, they're the ones suggesting survival. They're the ones suggesting that the mind is somehow continuing after death. And I think, those are incredible if there's something objective.
Yeah, absolutely. I only saw a ghost one time, but it was a pretty extraordinary experience. And, I think that these things tend to happen when you don't expect them. Maybe that's why it happens to a lot of people when they're sleeping. But I was doing a talk on spirituality and angels and different things at a place up north in Scotland, and it was a very, very old inn that had been there for like 500 years.
Okay.
And I was standing and I was talking to the audience, to the people who were there, and it was lovely. And then all of a sudden I felt as if I had to move out the way for someone who wanted to walk past me. And I literally stopped and said, "Oh, excuse me." And I went to move to let this person pass, and I saw him as clear as anything, and then he just wasn't there. And I described to everybody, because obviously I was in front of an audience of 50 people, so they all saw me talking to myself, trying to
Right.
excuse somebody past who wasn't there. So I said, this is what he looked like, and I described this man. And at the very end of the evening, when we were packing up the show, the woman who owns the inn came to me with a black and white picture in a frame, and she said, "Was that him?" And it was him, and it
Right.
was the man who had owned the inn, not the person before she had owned it, but the person before that. And I know that that evidence is only testimony, so it doesn't really count for much, but to me, I saw the person who was in that photograph, and that was really amazing evidence for me. But obviously, being a medium, I speak to people who are in spirit, so I don't really look upon them as being ghosts or, anything like that. I still see them as being very human and very much people. And, again, that's possibly why ghosts or people in spirit can interact with us who are living, because we still keep this same resonance or this same energy. Perhaps that's how we can interact in a way that a spirit, say, doesn't interact with a table, like you mentioned. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
there's something in that there. Okay, next question. I've just given you a little step for a hint there about what I think about how ghosts could exist. So, if such things as ghosts were to exist, could you tell us your theory or a theory as to how you think this kind of phenomena could or might be possible?
Whoa, that's okay. So we're just going from the pure basis of if they are, if
Yeah,
they.
pull it out of that knowledgeable mind somewhere. Just, make a collage of ideas that how you think it could be possible.
Okay. Ow. Um, bang my elbow on the desk there.
Rub the
Uh,
opposite one, it's good luck.
at least it didn't hit my funny bone. Okay, so if they do exist, well, there's been different theories presented. Some people believe that if ghosts are an independent thing, how are they actually visualized? How are they showing this visual presence? There's some people that believe that it was down to electrons. Certainly people like Scott Rogo and Raymond Bayless with the telephone calls from the dead, they believe that the whole idea of a dead person being able to produce their voice as live speech over the telephone was manipulation of the electrons within the telephone line to produce recognizable speech. Not being a physicist, I don't want to delve into any guesses as to how electrons would form a physical appearance of a human that people can see, but that's certainly one theory that's been presented. And the stone tape theory as well, the idea that the brickwork that contains iron oxide particles, very much like a videotape or a cassette tape, it's recording the images and the sounds of the past, and at a certain time, when someone goes back into that place where the event occurred, it replays for that certain person if the environmental and psychological conditions are perfect and correct to let it replay. Again, how's that occurring? I don't know, but it's another theory as to how and why they're doing it. Another one was this water tape theory that water molecules could retain images again and play it back, very much like the stone tape theory. Beyond that, if it's not just a recording and ghosts actually have conscious awareness, they're retaining their personality and so forth, who knows? Are they just doing it via their own willpower? I mean, do you consciously know how you're actually making yourself start to dream? Do you actually say, right, time to turn on dreams when we actually go to sleep? No, it just happens. And then when we're in the dream, we just go along with it and we go to wherever we want to. We interact with whoever we want to and we do what we want to do. And that's much the same as the waking state. We're conscious. I'm certainly conscious. Now, I can vouch my own consciousness. I can't vouch for anyone else's. I only assume everyone else is conscious because I can interact with them and because they can describe their experiences and they seem familiar. So I'm having to assume that everyone else is conscious without actually knowing where it's come from, how it started, what consciousness is and what existence is. I have no choice but to just act anyway and just go along with the situation that I'm in. So if we go from this situation of being living to suddenly being dead and without a body, and you're in an astral body, and you can just glide, go to wherever you want, obtain information from wherever you want, and interact with people still as a ghost, it just happens. And maybe at the moment, there's no possible way for science to know how that's occurring because science still doesn't know where consciousness is, where it comes from, or what exactly it is. And until we understand what consciousness is, we won't understand what a ghost is, if indeed they are what they are.
Absolutely, and you're branching into my area of interest there, which is philosophy. So these are all very philosophical questions, and the fact that you and I have academic careers and actual careers, still trying to answer these
Oh, be
questions.
careful. Are you trying to say non-academic careers aren't careers? Ooh.
No, no, I'm trying to say that we would neither of us have academic nor actual careers if there
Ah,
were already proof as to what the answer to that question is. So I think that you did a really good job of giving us some things to look at there. So, okay, so is it quantum physics? Could be consciousness. That's some light study for the viewers to do when they get away from here. So thanks for that. Okay, so could you give us, Callum, an example of an experiment that could attempt to prove the existence of ghosts?
well, I relate to one that's with my future project, something that I'm working on, the late parapsychologist and contradictorily psychic, Dr. Alex Tannis. Big admirer of him, and the Alex Tannis Foundation for Scientific Research have been supporting my own research for the past couple of years. And he did a few books on different studies and his thoughts and theories, but they did a specific test with him quite a few times at the American Society of Psychical Research. It was there that he met Dr. Carlos Osis, a psychologist, and they did a lot of research together, not only on ghosts and hauntings, in one attempt to prove this evidence for survival, in their minds, or at least provide evidence that somehow personality is continuing after death. But the other way they did it was to look at the out-of-body state. Again, it's still doing the same thing. It's in that survival category. The mind is interacting or operating outside of the body. What they did was Alex was placed 4 rooms away from the experimenters, and he was in basically a relaxation chamber. It was a room with comfy cushions and mattresses on the floor. He could lie down, he could relax, he could meditate, and he was hooked up to heart monitors and so forth, and an intercom system. So 4 rooms away, he could still speak to Dr. Carlos Osis. Now, how were they going to test the out-of-body state? Well, what they did was 4 rooms away, there was a machine that created optical illusions randomly. And these optical illusions would be a particular image and a particular color with the image that could change. So there could be various combinations of color and image. And the only way you could actually see what the machine was producing was to bend down and look through a particular scope. So much like on a video camera, you had to look specifically through the lens to actually find out what the next image was, even though the machine throughout the trial will record what each symbol was coming out as. So that was the experimenter's information, which they'll gather afterwards. Also, next to the machine was a strain gauge. They were trying to actually see if there was any environmental changes around the optical illusion machine. No one was stood by it. No one was going next to it throughout the whole of the experiments. Now, first of all, was he actually remote viewing? Was he getting these targets right? Well, in terms of the targets, it seemed that at least in terms of psychic abilities or remote viewing, he was able to know what these images were at distance. He was getting them accurate 90% of the time after a whole trial of these images coming through. But what was the strain gauge saying? There was high strain gauge activation at periods when he was having higher hit rates. So a cluster of him getting correct guesses opposed to when there was a few misses mixed in. And this suggested that something was affecting the strain gauge around the optical illusion device at the times of high hit rates. When Alex was asked throughout the experiment and even afterwards what was going on, he called his astral body Alex 2. He could actually see where he was going, he could travel about, and he said it was only when he was out of the body and he was Alex 2 and he was on his tiptoes looking in through this lens at the images that he felt most out of body. He felt he'd gone through a complete transition of consciousness, and that's what they assumed to be the soul. For a while, they termed these experiments as some form of measurement of the soul. Alex didn't like the idea of soul being used. He did prefer that, it's a suggestion of consciousness or the mind, but that was one way to actually test survival. There's been other ones like with near-death experiences, such as in hospitals, they'll put a playing card or some numbers on shelves above the person in case their body rises up during the point of death and maybe comes back if they've been revived, just to see if the body did go up, saw the image, they come back and they can tell you what it is. So there's been different tests for survival in terms of experiments such as those where we've got some fairly good control going on.
Sure. And those are really, really interesting. And again, it's difficult to argue with those sorts of statistics if he's getting 90% hit rate and he
Yes.
can explain that his body is going and standing there, and you know it's lab conditions, you know that there's no one in the room, so that is pretty good, I would say, conclusive evidence, significance at the least. One that I read that was really interesting was there seems to be quite a shockingly high correlation between people who go into cardiac arrest and who subsequently survive and are able to tell um, everyone what was going on at the time. They're able to say what time it was, what the
Mm.
nurse's name badge was, when they were going through cardiac arrest. So their heart had stopped, their brain was losing oxygen, they were unconscious, and yet somehow they were able to describe exactly what was going on in the room. And it
Uh,
seems to be particularly prevalent amongst people specifically who go into cardiac arrest. It's actually an academic paper, so what I'll do is I'll find it, I'll put a link on the blog. If you're interested in reading that, you can go ahead
yeah.
and do that.
Well, if
Okay?
people are interested in that, a good book to recommend is one by Dr. Peter Fenwick and his wife Elizabeth Fenwick called The Art of Dying. And that discusses those cases and also ADE's actual death experiences. These are ones where they suggest the person's been dead for an hour or so.
Yeah.
I remember a case where a guy had been put in the morgue and he'd been dead for 3 years. And when they came out to give him his autopsy, he woke up just before the scalpel went to his chest and they had to send him back into the emergency theatre. He supposedly remembered everything that was going on during this 3 day period of being in the freezer and dead. Remarkable cases.
Absolutely. Okay, next question.
Hmm.
And this has come from one of our readers also. If ghosts were to exist, do you believe that they would have a predisposition to positive or negative energy, i.e., good or evil? And if you have a idea either way, what makes you think that?
Uh, I, the first thing about energy is I don't like people kind of just using it without explaining what type of energy that they mean. So if I've ever been in a haunted location with mediums and they're forever saying, "Oh, very negative energy in here, very positive energy in here," what is this energy? What are you talking about? Do you mean just friendly environment from a past social interaction, or you're actually talking about the electrics of the building? It's messed up and it needs an electrician, so it's negative energy. What do you want about when you mean energy? So maybe if we talk about humans and social interaction and emotions, maybe we could argue that, if you're feeling very happy and positive, there might be certain types of haunting occurrences that occur around that. Certainly, we know with poltergeists, there's the suggestion that if someone's going through a very depressive or stressful period, it might heighten the haunting activity that's going on
Sure.
and the poltergeist activity. So that's one case. Negative energies, though, in terms of evil spirits and demons and so forth, not a believer in those whatsoever. It's certainly something that's still fairly dominant within the USA in terms of their theories of ghosts and hauntings. But we have people, again, if I refer back to Dr. Alex Tannis again, in something that I'm publishing soon from his work. It's a joint thing with us together, even though I've worked on it, even though he's dead. Uh,
Is it helping you
he,
from the spirit
yeah, I
world?
know,
Is
from
that what
the
it
other-
is?
I wish he was via the telephone,
Oh.
but I read in his notes he said he didn't believe in demons or possessions and so forth. He said if anyone believes that there are demons or they've been possessed, it's just down to personality problems, which
Yeah.
I thought was very blunt and to the point. And he said, I think it's a load of crap. He said it outright in his book chapters. So yeah, I don't think in terms of something that's objective, that's there. There's this negative force, there's this negative energy, certainly from humans and interaction, because you can get an uncomfortable feeling from a living person
Sure.
without them opening their mouth. You could just be there in a room with someone and just not feel comfortable in their presence, or just be with someone again. You've not spoken to them, you've not interacted with them, but
Yeah.
you feel very comfortable about them. And it doesn't always necessarily come down to their facial features or their body language. You could call it the vibes that you're getting from them.
Their
There's
energy.
also
No,
but
no, no, we'll not go
there's
there.
a guy called Dr. Sean O'Callaghan. He used to be at the University of Lancaster. He's now doing work in the USA, but his background's in theology, and he studies vampires. That's his main background. But in terms of social groups of vampires, so people that go about portraying themselves as vampires, believing they're vampires, And one of the types of vampires that he mentioned, one that doesn't actually drink human blood, because there are some people that do and get signed permission to do so in small quantities. The other one was that they got their feed, they got their blood fix, as it were, in an alternative way. And that was from being a social vampire. And we use that term quite a lot.
Yeah.
Someone that you're around, you get a negative energy from them, and you come away from spending an hour with a person, you probably just met them, and you're exhausted. You want to sit down, you're like, God, that guy was effort, to talk to interact with. Or maybe they interacted with you too much and they were just socially draining. And it was a negative experience. Even they might have had good intentions and trying to be positive. But that's a different form of positive negative energy, but it's come from social interaction.
Well, I agree absolutely, and I've found from working with people living and in spirit as well that they retain the natures that they had when they're alive, when they're people, like you said. Maybe when we go to the next life, we learn a little bit more, or we get the opportunity to look back and say, okay, I made a little mistake there. But if they were pissed off in life, they're pissed off that side. If they were nice and sweet and kind and, gentle and reserved, then they retain that. So I agree. I don't think there is one either way. And, I agree with this, sense of sort of negative entities, shall we say, rather than energy. I honestly believe that most of the time, from what I've encountered, those things are what you make of them in your own mind.
Yeah, there are some very, very rare cases of ghosts that allegedly hurt people. I mean, it's certainly this is a case of a table, the Jane Peters of a table being thrown at some builders.
Sure.
And then you've got the classic old Elliot O'Donnell stuff. And he wrote a book called Ghosts, Helpful and Harmful, and one
Okay.
called Dangerous Ghosts as well. Very sort of fabricated stories. Not, I wouldn't rely on the truth too much in all of the accounts. A lot of them did derive from people's genuine accounts, but how Elliot O'Donnell chose to write them up is a different question, but still, he has focused 2 books on specifically negative ghosts.
I think we'll stop talking about this now. We'll be giving our viewers nightmares. Okay, so next
It's
question.
under the bed.
Yeah, I know. It's in the cupboard. Okay, so next question. So as I understand it, you mentioned a little while ago that you're working on a new book.
Mm-hmm.
So could you tell us a little bit about that and any other upcoming work that you're doing, or anything that's like really exciting to you right now, or anything that's just really hot in the world of parapsychology at the moment? We want the inside scoop.
I won't give the title away too much, but I'll tell you what I'm working on. One of them is an unpublished manuscript by Dr. Alex Tanous. He published 3 books. They were all co-authored. He wrote one called Beyond Coincidence, which was his autobiography with Harvey Ardman. And then he wrote Is Your Child Psychic with Catherine Donnelly. And then with Timothy Gray, just after he died, it was published a book called Dream Symbols and Psychic Power. So he only got 3 books out, but he had several unpublished manuscripts. Here's one from the Alex Tanous Foundation that people can still get, but it's just not in a published format, but people can still order it. It's called Contact. One of his unpublished books about UFO experiences that people had a little bit different for Alex Tanous to do. But he nevertheless had an interest in people that claimed they'd experienced UFOs, but so would D. Scott Rogo and some other parapsychologists had an interest in UFOs. One of his other, and he did something on the Bermuda Triangle as well. But one that I came across was called Conversations with Ghosts, and it was unfinished. It was only 3 chapters long, and I asked the foundation if they were interested in me kind of developing this more, and they've been very positive with it. And it's only a few months away from kind of being in a completed stage, so I'm not saying exactly what I've done to it, but I've certainly expanded on it, and it's mainly from using Alex's unpublished notes, his essays, his interviews, trying to make it more than 3 chapters long. I've written an introduction and so forth, and there's some extra stuff in the back as well that's all related to what Alex Tanous did regarding ghosts, but people don't actually regularly know about it. It's very sought after material. And especially here in the UK, we don't know much about Alex. He was certainly a big guy over in the US and not here. And I think it'd be great to bring him in a bit more, because he's one of those people as a psychic and also a parapsychologist that presented incredible results. I mean, you have Elaine Garrett. She's someone that you could call a parapsychologist. She established the Parapsychology Foundation, but was also an incredible psychic. Again, people that you just wish were around longer, so we could establish some form of evidentiality from their abilities. Same with like people like Mrs. Piper, Mrs. Leonard and Rudy Schneider. Again, we have these people that just couldn't debunk them because it didn't seem there was any trickery going on. But at the same time, they just weren't around long enough, or we didn't develop a good enough method while they were here to get something solid that, you know, is just not possible to argue against. There's no room for error or criticism. So I think Alex deserves his recognition, which is why I'm trying to keep his name alive, and support what the foundation does, because they're supporting my research and other people like me. So, you know, it's great if they're supporting what I'm doing. I want to put something back in and keep Alex's name alive for what he did in such a sort of a short space of time. He spent 20 years with the American Society for Psychical Research. And 20 years is a long time, but in terms of research, it's not a lot of time to do, you know, or make any great advances.
Yeah.
So that's one project. The other stuff is another book project that's based on the paranormal and sounds, but I'm not going to say specifically what, because
Well,
that's
that's interesting.
certainly a secretive project at the moment. That's a co-authored work that I'm doing with Steve Parsons at the moment. And apart from that, there's more media projects in the line, more documentaries coming up that I'm involved with, guest lectures up and down the country, and hopefully I'll be back with the Scottish Society for Psychical Research at some point to do another guest lecture up there. So.
Yes, we'd be delighted to have you again. It was fantastic. I really, really loved hearing you talk about telephone calls from the dead. So thank you very much. We are very excited to hear about whatever new books you have that are coming out. So you can keep us posted, and when they're out, I'll put a little link up onto the blog where
Okay.
people can go and click on it. So thank you so much for coming and taking part in this interview, and for giving us your expert insights into the paranormal and ghostly phenomena. Callum's book, Telephone Calls from the Dead, is available now. Click the link. Oh, there it is. Click the link underneath this video to order it, and you will be absolutely amazed. You'll love it. The things you'll read in there will blow your mind. So thanks so much for tuning in, folks. Next week we are moving on to the letter H, and H is for happiness. I'm very excited to write about happiness. So if you have any questions or comments for myself or Callum, please do share them with us in the comments section of this page below. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Bye.
Bye bye.